Alright guys, I've got 2 more hours of rambling from Yarrick and Simon to cover here. And of course, like always, everything is subject to change, but at least this time around, nothing seemed to change during the course of the AMA. So I guess that is a step in the right direction. And to begin, let's give you a bit of an overview of how to speak Archon Studio, because this is very important. When these two guys answer a question with sometime in the future, or yeah, we can work on that, what they really mean is they probably haven't started working on it at all, or it's not in any sort of clear timeline as to when it's going to show up. And we know this now because someone asked a question about the siege tank. Of course, we're talking StarCraft, by the way. I should probably give some context there. So someone was asking a question about the siege tank and when maybe some questions about how that was going to work with the whole siege mode and normal tank mode. And they happen to mention that this was planned to be released in Wave 5. So therefore, with the products that they are working on, they got a decent idea, at least approximately, of when they're going to be coming out. Now next, let's talk a little bit about the starter set. And well, I would love to have some things to show you here, but Archon Studio, even though they had a really beautiful setup recently at the Essen Games Fair, there's plenty of pictures of it that other people took, but they have like no promotional photos of their miniatures, which is kind of odd. This is basically all you get from their website for the StarCraft miniatures with the absolutely beautiful painted miniatures they had on display. So let's actually talk a little bit about the starter set now. And this is one of the topics of conversation during this most recent AMA, which was dedicated entirely to the upcoming StarCraft Miniatures game they've been hyping up now for, a good chunk of the year, about 8 months or so, a little bit less than that. And what they said is that we can expect it to have 12 Marines, or 2 squads of 6 Marines, 2 Marauders, which is 1 squad of Marauders, 3 Medics, also 1 squad, 24 Zerglings, which are 2 squads of 12 Zerglings each, a squad of 3 Roaches, and a single Queen. So you can kind of think of the images we saw a while ago when they're doing the play testing at Blizzard. That looked to be about 1 starter set or so. And then in addition to the Terran and Zerg starter set, the Protoss are going to have their own army box. And this is going to be containing 2 squads of Zealots, 1 squad of Adepts, and a single Sentry. And from what I remember, at least I don't recall them saying exactly how many Zealots and how many Adepts were in a squad, like I said, with the Marines as well as all the Zerg units. On the topic of price for these 2 products, well, they did toss out some numbers. They're a little bit hesitant to say, what it might be, but in the ballpark, they were looking at $150 to $160 for the 2-player starter set, and then about $60 to $70 for the Protoss standalone army pack. Now, they're not entirely sure what some of the other non-miniature things are going to be, so maybe there'll be a map in them, maybe there won't be, and that's probably one of the things that's really affecting price at this point. In addition to those 2 starter boxes, we do know from this AMA that Artanis for the Protoss, as well as the Stalker, will likely be available at launch. And in terms of the pretty pictures we've seen from Essen, the Goliath also shows up on the table, of course, as a Terran unit, so that miniature will likely be available at launch or shortly afterwards. Of course, then also during the event, you could have purchased Zeratul while you were there, or you could have ordered it online. And if you didn't happen to go ahead and do that, well, that particular Zeratul miniature was kind of a promotional thing, only limited time availability, but there will be a standard version of him later on. So if you missed out on this particular ordering, you can still use that character in the game when he comes out in whatever, I guess, the standard miniature form is going to end up looking like. It wouldn't surprise me if the goal was to have pre-orders ready to go by this game conference in Germany, but of course that didn't happen. Originally, they were scheduled to go live sometime around this part of the year, but one of the big news items from this AMA is that your pre-orders are going to now start, at least the goal is to have them start in January of 2026. The release of the game is still set for March or April of 2026. Hopefully this is because they're already manufacturing the miniatures right now and they're just kind of finishing up the rules and getting some of the balancing stuff sorted out. And one important thing about the pre-ordering process here is that if you actually want to get the game when it first is available in March or April, assuming they hit that timeline, you're going to have to do the pre-order from Archon Studio directly, because your local game stores are not going to be getting StarCraft the Miniatures Game until several months after it initially goes up for pre-order on the Archon Studio website. Yarrick was actually asked about this, and he seemed to think it wouldn't be a big deal that the fact game stores wouldn't have it on launch at the same time that Archon Studio has it. Maybe that's going to be the case for some of them, but honestly, in my opinion, when it comes to working with my tabletop game years ago, game store owners can be very finicky and they can kind of hold a bit of a grudge, and I could see this horribly backfiring at Archon Studio. And I don't know, well, I guess we'll just have to see how this ends up playing out. Longer term, past whatever this initial set of releases ends up being, they did mention the Siege Tank is going to be available as part of Wave 5, and that starting in Wave 2 or 3, we're going to see some map terrain packs that are going to be useful if you're going to be doing tournament play of StarCraft the Miniatures Game. And right now the plan is to have these wave releases 2 to 3 months apart. So that means the Siege Tank, we're looking at late 2026 into early 2027. And someone did ask about that particular miniature, if it's going to have the ability to transform between, your driving mode and your siege mode. Yarrick seemed to kind of toss it out like, oh yeah, engineers are going to be working on that. And I don't know, maybe they'll pull it off. To be honest with you, it'd be kind of cool. But one thing I've learned over the years when it comes to essentially just, what I want to say, doing cosplay of video game things, the physics of video games and how stuff move often doesn't translate very well into the real world, even in miniature form, because they frequently violate that all-important rule where two things can't be in the same spot at the same time. So anyway, maybe at the end of the day, the Siege Tank will just be able to go ahead and have its turret rotate, and there might be 2 miniatures, but it would be kind of cool if they did pull off some sort of transformation process. So let's talk list building now. This game is going to have a fairly standard-ish style force org chart if you're familiar with other games. So your units kind of fit into one of 4 or 5 different categories, and there's a limit number of each category you can take. Now, Archon Studios did give us some numbers for these different categories and what they were going to be. However, they also gave us a sample Protoss army that is your standard size, and it really didn't seem to fit at all into the numbers they gave us for the Force org chart, which is kind of odd. And there's 2 possible explanations here. One thing we do know is that in last time we showed off some of those building cards that are sitting on the side of the battlefield. Now, some of those cards can affect your Force org chart and allow you to take certain more of a certain category. However, the other explanation, which is also probably likely, is they're still kind of making some of this stuff up. And the fact is, whatever numbers they gave us were some earlier thing, and the example Protoss list is probably better reflects of how the game's Force org chart is currently structured. Now, one of the new things we actually saw here was a Hydralisk stat card, and important to note, this is not the final Hydralisk stat card. They said some of the things are going to be changing, but you can see up here in the corner where you have squad size. Here's your small squad size 2, here's your large squad size 4, and these assorted special abilities that have a little up arrow next to them, well, those are optional upgrades that have some sort of additional point cost to them on top of the base cost of the unit. Now, previously there had been some discussion that this game for points cost is going to use both minerals and Vespene gas, just like the video game, but all that's been thrown out and you just got a simple numerical point system like nearly every other game out there. The standard list size is going to be 2,000 points, and doing some rough math and approximation based on the few points data we saw, I would expect that the starter armies in the starter set, as well as the Protoss set, are going to be like 600 to 700 points per army. So on the gameplay front, only about half of your army is going to start on the board, and you're going to have reinforcements come in throughout the game. Now, exactly how that process is going to unfold really depends on the mission you're playing, and that'll give you the details about when and how much units you can bring in per turn or whatever it may be. When it comes to the actual objectives for the missions, well, all they've really said is you can kind of expect the normal types of things you would expect to see with a tabletop miniatures game. So that probably means controlling points on the board and maybe trying to get to other deployment zones, and of course just eradicating as much of the enemy as possible. Now the turn structure is a little bit different here. You've got 3 phases: movement, the assault phase, and close combat. Now movement's pretty straightforward. You move your guys around, and there's some other special movement in there. The assault phase combines ranged shooting as well as the actual charge movement of charging into the enemy. And then close combat, well, that's when all the hand-to-hand combat and the puking on each other occurs, because I naturally think of what is probably some of the funniest 3 minutes of the history of internet video, which of course is Cardbot Animation's Roach vs. Roach 3-minute long puke joke. It's a fantastic parody of StarCraft 2 if you have not actually seen it. Anyway, I'm getting seriously sidetracked right here. However, what is interesting about these phases is that during each one, you're going to go back and forth activating 1 unit at a time, taking the actions, and whichever player finishes their actions first will be the first player to take an action in the next phase. Now, the thing that kind of makes this even more unique is that you don't have to activate all your units. You can choose to be like, okay, I am done moving units and I am not going to move anymore, even though I have 4 guys left available that I could possibly move. And this is going to guarantee that you're going to be the first person to either make a charge movement or open fire during the assault phase. Now the same pass mechanic is going to apply during the assault phase, so if you finish up all your shooting and close combat charges first, or you choose to pass, you can go ahead and make sure that you get that initial attack in close combat before the opposing player. Finally, if we bring up the Hydralisk card here one more time, you can see that some of the things are fairly standard. Movement is a variation of what you get in Star Wars Legion, except that whereas in that game you got to move your leader first, then put all the models around the leader, you could move any unit in the squad and put all the units around that guy that you chose to move first. Now when it comes to combat, I thought I heard Yarrick say this was not a bucket of dice game, but as an example here, for the Hydralisk, each Hydralisk miniature gets 3 dice with a potential of 4 guys in the squad. That's 12 dice, and at least in my opinion, rolling 12 dice at once counts as a bucket of dice game. So maybe I just heard something wrong there. When it comes to basic combat, well, the hit here, you have 3+ and 4+, so that's pretty straightforward. Armor save is also pretty straightforward, as well as wounds. And then size pertains to figuring out line of sight, because like I mentioned last time, something I was really excited about is this game does not have true line of sight to it. 2 sort of unique aspects to this game is one, this evade. Now evade is a special additional armor save the model can get if certain conditions are met. So for example here, we see this lurking special ability. If the Hydralisk does not move, they can make an evade roll against range attacks, and this evade defensive roll is an addition to their armor save. In addition, you have this concept down here of surge. You see light and armored. This is how they're implementing that whole kind of minor paper, rock, scissors thing that StarCraft has, where certain units' weapons work better against certain units with certain tags. So in this case, if the Hydralisk is attacking either a light or armored unit, this surge die is going to allow the Hydralisk to go ahead and nullify a certain amount of the enemy's armor saves as a way of kind of symbolizing that they're more effective against a given target. Well, there you go. That is about 2 hours of questions and answers summarized down into a handful of minutes. At least those are the most important parts that I've pulled out of the entire 2-hour thing, which I indeed did watch, and with like 2 pages of notes on it. So anyway, as I'll finish up here with the disclaimer that Archon Studio gave, which I think I also mentioned at the start, but all this stuff is subject to change. So we'll see how things go over the next few months, and maybe, just maybe, we'll have something to pre-order in 2026. Oh, and I did order the Zeratul model, so I have no idea when that's going to show up, but when it does, we'll certainly take a look on that. And of course, while we're on the topic of Archon Studio, I have been diving into their previous life as Protoss Studios with that whole Alien versus Predator debacle. And boy, that's a crazy, wild ride. So you can expect a video on that whole thing coming up not too far in the future, because I was able to find a massive collection of information on that thanks to the forums over at DACA. All right, guys. Well, thank you all for watching. I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. And if you're interested in 3D printing, be sure to head over to fracturedcolony.com to check out my latest set of 3D printable gaming miniatures, which, to be honest with you, by the time you're watching this, they're not available for sale yet because I just finished sending them out to the backers last week. But sometime soon, this guy, as well as some other guys hiding over here, the new ones will be available for sale. The old guys, well, they've been up there for a little while if you're interested in some of these things. All right, I'll see you guys all next time.